This is the shower curtain in the upstairs bathroom at my parents' house. They've had it for at least as long as I can remember. Probably longer. When I was a kid, it was the shower curtain in this bathroom, and 20 years later, it's still here. I always liked it. When I was very young, I used to stare into this pattern of jagged squiggly lines strewn across it, and out of these patterns, forms would spontaneously emerge. This is the one that always stuck out to me the most. He's a cartoon clown with a giant nose. If I outline it like this, you can plainly see the eyes, the right ear, his grin, and this little tuft of hair. Something about him always made me a little uneasy. This one was the first one I found, the frog monster. You can see his tail, his hunched back, his eye, and his puffed up frog throat. Right beside him is this monster, who I decided was his friend. Above both of them is this character who seems to be hanging from something, and it looked like he had the head of an anteater. I always had the sense that he was writing something, even though it didn't exactly look like it. Coming out of the clown's nose is this snot monster. Coming out of his nose is another snot monster, and coming out of him is a third snot monster. If you looked at this curtain, I'd imagine you'd see other shapes and other characters. You'd probably see at least a few things that I don't, and perhaps you have some difficulty seeing the things that I see. But when I look, I'm unable to see anything other than this. This effect is called pareidolia, and it's what causes people to see faces where there are none. Pareidolia is technically a kind of hallucination. It is to see something which is not physically there, and it happens more often than you think. This is not a man's face. It's a piece of stone. This is not the moon. It's a picture in my room. This is not a city. It's a bunch of pixels on your screen. It's very difficult to define the difference between pareidolic hallucination and art. You might say that art has to be artificial. It has to be made by a human. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is there a difference between this phenomenon and this one? Because I don't think there is. This is a stone that resembles a human face, and so is this. This one is a sculpture, and this one is not. But both are examples of the same effect. If you watched my video, The Shape of Everything, you may remember that when I talked about color, I said that what gives red its redness is not the color itself, but the memory of the color, colors like it, and what they've meant in the past. A red thing reminds us of other red things, and that memory is what makes red feel like red. To some extent, those memories are inherited. Certain colors, and red is a good example, probably mean some things so often and so reliably that the connection between the two has left a mark on our DNA. But I think at the same time there is a degree to which the color makes itself known to us as individuals. Imagine somebody who is held in a gray prison with no windows. The walls were gray, all the prisoners wore gray, and all the guards wore gray, except for one, who wore yellow. This guard in yellow wore the only color our prisoner ever saw, and twice a week, the guard in yellow would come into his cell and beat him. How do you think this would affect his perception of the color yellow? If it was his favorite color going into prison, it probably wasn't when he got out. That alone means his perception of the color changed. This is a very extreme example of what's happening all the time. Every time you encounter something that has a particular color, the object makes a subtle impression on your perception of that color. The same is the case for shapes, objects, tastes, smells, etc. There are some smells, for example, that take me back to childhood. And sometimes I listen to certain songs to visit a memory. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Sensation is memory. Sometimes your own memory, sometimes someone else's. But always memory. When you look at a color, you feel the memory of every previous encounter with it. These compound supermemories are the stuff your perceptions are made of, and they are responsible for the feelings which all perceptions evoke. I call these emanations. In Jungian language, we would say that these supermemories, or emanations, are projected onto the objects of experience. However, I think to some extent this term confuses people. The projector was a relatively recent innovation at the time that Freud and Jung were writing. It was something fresh in the minds of their readers. To say that one was projecting one's own mind onto the world would have conjured a vivid and illuminating mental image. Projectors allow us to change the perception of a screen, even though the screen is not really doing anything. That things are happening on the screen is an illusion conjured from a distance by the projector. As a metaphor for human perception, it works, and it bears an interesting resemblance to Plato's allegory of the cave. Had Plato lived today, he would have only needed to describe a cinema. However, my main gripe with the term is that projection is an active process. It's not something which happens involuntarily. You do not accidentally project a reel of film onto a screen. Furthermore, a literal projector can be turned off, and so many people get the idea that you can stop projecting and observe the world as it really is. These apparent implications are misleading. If you did not project an emanation onto the color red, you could not meaningfully perceive the color at all, because the color in and of itself does not mean anything. The emanation is the perceived meaning, and so perception without projection would be meaningless. The material world is ultimately an undivided field of chaotic activity. Everything affects everything else, and so everything is, at least to some extent, connected. Everything is only where it is because of everything else, and everything is made of the same stuff, and so everything is, at least to some extent, one substance. But in order for human beings to interact with this field in the way that we do, we have to give names to the patterns we see. Donald Hoffman likens perception to a computer interface, and this is a useful metaphor here. The machine you are looking at is interpreting a vast sequence of ones and zeros, but it translates that data, which is meaningless to you, into letters, sounds, colors, etc. The patterns which we observe in the world are really like waves in the ocean. All ocean waves are made of the same stuff. The only difference is where that stuff is and what it's doing. The only reason things seem so separate and distinct is because your mind is hyper-attuned to the differences between them and to their practical functions. It's all the rage today in occult circles to say, all is one, you are God, and separation is an illusion. But none of that is actually true, it just sounds nice. A hand has 5 fingers. Your thumb is not your pinky, and your pinky is not your thumb. But they are both your hand. Your hand is not more real than your fingers, and your fingers are not more real than your hand. This wave is not this wave, but they are both the ocean. Separation is an illusion, but unity is also an illusion. For no unity is ever absolute, and no division is ever absolute. But these illusions are necessary ones. They are approximations of reality which are better than nothing. That's what all concepts are. And that's why we need our projections. Flawed as our ideas may be, we can't see without them. The projected psyche is ultimately a sense organ, which interprets and translates the information from the physical senses and relays them to consciousness. The meanings which surround us are all, technically speaking, projected emanations, pareidotic hallucinations. This is a candle in my room. Candle is not a substance. A candle is a type of pattern. The term candle is not describing what it is. It describes what a human may use it for. That is a projection. It has almost nothing to do with the object, and almost everything to do with us as human observers. This is another candle, which I made out of an orange peel. Structurally and chemically, these two objects are nothing alike, but they're both candles. And the reason they are is because they mean the same thing to a human being. And that has absolutely nothing to do with their composition. So that candleness is a projection. It's in the observer, not the object. The only thing which distinguishes it from the common idea of a hallucination is that it works. But that doesn't mean the psychic mechanism is different. What is occurring is the unconscious psyche observes the phenomenon, remembers that similar patterns of information were called candles, and so it names this new pattern of information a candle as well. It then transmits this interpretation to consciousness. The alchemists assigned this function of connecting consciousness and the body to Mercury, the metal named after the Roman messenger god. To the alchemists, Mercury was the feminine spirit, the counterpart to the sulfuric masculine soul. Yellow flammable sulfur was likened to the sun, and silver watery Mercury to the moon. The last third of the alchemical tria prima was salt, which represents crystallization, physical matter, and therefore the earth. The mercurial spirit corresponded to what we would call the mind, or the psyche, and this correspondence is quite apt, because the psyche is, as the alchemists supposed, mercurial. It acts as an intermediary between the physical body and consciousness, carrying messages back and forth between the two. Mercury was the god of communication, the patron of the eloquent, deceivers and truth-tellers alike. He was a trickster. Just so, our hallucinations can help us perceive the world in a useful way, or they can fool us. However, they are always nonetheless hallucinatory. It is as though surrounding consciousness is a shell or cloud of projections. There is a backdrop of feelings, what we might call qualia, and in front of that, a layer of ideas. Behind these two veils, the real world as it is lies hidden. In the East, these veils are called Maya, or illusion. And interestingly, the mother of Mercury was also named Maya. Now, the word Maya has the same root as the word magic, and in his human incarnation, Mercury was the legendary magician Hermes Trismegistus, a master of alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. All of this essentially points to the same idea. There is at bottom no difference between hallucination and true perception. There are the fabled occult magicians who command spirits and bend the world to their will with secret knowledge, and there are the modern stage magicians who make you think you saw something you didn't. The metal mercury, unlike other metals, is a fluid at room temperature. And because mercury is a liquid, it forms smooth, even surfaces, which are reflective. And that is my preferred metaphor for perception. Technically speaking, there is no difference between a projection and a reflection. A projector screen is a reflector. But as a metaphor, reflection has a distinct advantage. You do not make a mirror reflect your image. It simply happens, and there is nothing you can do to prevent it. Let's return to our candle from before. Imagine for a moment that the flame of this candle is your consciousness. Light shines out from the flame and is reflected by the objects that surround it. What shines back from those objects is nothing other than the same light which came from the candle. As a matter of fact, what shines back is literally the candle's own reflection, which just so happens to be rather bright. But because the surfaces are not ideal reflectors, you can't tell. But if I hold the candle up to something smooth, its reflection is obvious. There is nothing special about glass other than its smoothness. Reflection is reflection, even if it doesn't look like it. If that were not so, projectors would not work in the first place. When the white candlelight shines on a red object, the object absorbs all the light except the red light, which it reflects. When it shines on a blue object, the blue light is reflected. I think the candle simplifies the idea I'm trying to explain. So when I looked at the shower curtain as a child, what I saw were projected emanations. I saw the kinds of things which are likely to attract and hold a young boy's attention. Frogs, monsters, cartoon characters, and snot. The same process which causes me to identify this color as red causes me to identify this meaningless shape as a cartoon clown. And it is the same process which caused ancient humanity to see gods and monsters in the stars. It is a mistake, I think, to regard these as utter illusions. It isn't technically wrong to call them hallucinations, nor is it technically wrong to say that calling this a book is a hallucination. In the first place, it's just a photograph. However, if all you perceived in this rectangle were the pixels, and that would not be misperception, that would mean that there is a real channel of information in this array of data, which you would not have access to. If you only perceived what was objectively here, that is, a matrix of dots, Far from seeing accurately, you're actually missing things. This is why the word information means information. The problem, it seems, is that we only call this process hallucination when it malfunctions. This muddies the water considerably. Furthermore, a book is not a thing, not according to anything other than a human being. To the rest of the universe, this is a bunch of wood pulp. But you're not the rest of the universe, are you? And that means that as far as you should be concerned, the book is more real than the paper. The real problem which all of this illuminated for me was this. How can we tell when we can trust these phantasms and when we can't? I think the answer lies in an entirely different perspective. It is to be found through the recognition of one's own reflection in the world. In the understanding that the world which each of us inhabits is an image of the condition of our own souls. This is a stone, but it is also a face, because that is what you and I see, and you and I are not illusions. Consider this a primer on this subject. There is much more I'd like to say in time, but for now I think this will suffice. All subjective realities exist, but some are better at it than others. Until next time, thank you for watching, and be well.